Hey friends, there are moments in life when the cupboards grow empty, when the pockets hold only dust, and when the hearts of mothers and fathers grow heavy with the silent cry, "Lord, how will we provide for our children?" Such was the condition of one family in central New York around the year 1830, a time when scarcity pressed hard upon nearly every home. The grain was scarce. Provisions were dear, and for many, obtaining even the simplest meal became a daily struggle. In this particular home, a mother of 6 children bore both the weight of work and the burden of prayer. She was a tailoress, bending over her needle and cloth by day and by candlelight, working tirelessly to earn whatever little she could. Her hands stitched garments for others, but her heart stitched prayers together for her family. Her faith was not hidden. It was known to her husband, who was not yet a man of prayer, and to her children, who watched her kneel and whisper to the God she trusted. Day after day, as their small stock of food grew smaller, she prayed earnestly, "Lord, provide for us. We are your children. Do not let us faint under this burden. You know our needs, and you have promised to supply them." Every prayer seemed to rise higher, as the family's means sank lower. The husband saw the accounts dwindling, the pantry growing bare, but he could not fail to notice the unwavering faith of his wife. To him, it may have seemed like folly at first, words spoken into the air, yet there was something about her confidence, her steady assurance that God would act, that began to plant seeds of hope even in his heart. What the family did not know was that, some miles away, another man was preparing for his own work. This man had a need for shingles, for his property, and thought to purchase a pine tree to fashion into the lumber he required. On his way, a thought struck him, one that had nothing to do with timber, nails, or shingles. It was a sudden, quiet impression that perhaps the family who owned the tree might also be in need of flour. It was a time of scarcity after all, and flour was precious. He reasoned that 2 bushels of wheat flour would certainly not go amiss. It was a thought that could have easily been dismissed. How many times do impressions come to us, only to be pushed aside as mere coincidence or passing fancy? But this man acted upon the prompting. He filled a bag with flour, slung it onto his wagon, and set out. The journey was not short. The family lived 6 or 7 miles from the nearest mill and, more importantly, they had no horse to make the trip themselves. Without his act of obedience to that gentle nudge in his spirit, the family would have remained in pressing need. When he arrived at the house, the mother greeted him, weary but steadfast. The man explained his errand. He wished to buy a pine tree for shingles, but had brought along flour as part of the payment, thinking it might help them in this time of scarcity. The woman's heart leapt. Her eyes filled with tears, and she declared with deep conviction, "That is in answer to prayer." In that single moment, heaven's reality broke into earth's scarcity. The children watched their mother's face, radiant with gratitude. The husband, though not yet a man of faith, could not deny the connection between his wife's prayers and this very practical provision. Later that evening, when their eldest son returned home, the mother announced with joy, "God has answered our prayers and sent a bag of flour." It was not a miracle in the sense of manna falling from the sky, yet it was no less the hand of God, just as surely as ravens once carried food to Elijah by the brook. God had moved on the heart of a neighbor to carry flour to a needy family. It was divine provision through human obedience. the extraordinary woven into the ordinary. The scene in that humble home lingers in the imagination. Picture it, the children, who had grown accustomed to meager portions, now watching as their mother lifted the heavy bag of flour. To them, it was not merely flour. It was an answer, a visible token that they're unseen. God had heard the whispered prayers from their bedside. The younger ones may not have understood the depth of the miracle, but they could see the joy and relief written across their mother's face. For the husband, the experience was something altogether different. He had watched his wife labor at her needle, her faith seemingly irrational when measured against their dwindling resources. Yet here was flour, real, tangible, undeniable, delivered at the very moment they most needed it. He may not have yet bent his knees in prayer, but that day he bowed his heart in acknowledgement. There must be something real about this God his wife trusted. Sometimes faith begins not with the words we speak, but with the evidence. We cannot deny. But notice something beautiful here. The man who brought the flour had no idea. He was stepping into the middle of a divine story. To him, it was simply a kind thought, a small courtesy, a way to add value to a business deal. He likely never realized how his simple obedience echoed across generations, how it would one day be recorded as a testimony of God's faithfulness, and how it would stir the hearts of readers and listeners. Nearly 2 centuries later, this is often how God works. His provision for one person begins with a gentle prompting in the heart of another. It reminds us of how the boy, with the 5 loaves and 2 fish, brought his small offering to Jesus, not knowing it would feed 5,000, or how Barnabas, moved with generosity, sold a field and laid the money at the apostles' feet, not realizing his act of giving would make room for Paul's ministry and alter the course of church history. And doesn't this still happen today? How many times has someone, out of the blue, said, "I just felt I should help you with this"? How often has a bill been paid, a meal provided, a door opened, all because God whispered into another person's heart? And on the other side of the story, how many times have we ourselves felt a quiet nudge to call a friend, give a small gift, or offer encouragement, only to later find it was exactly what they had prayed for? That bag of flour was more than food. It was a sermon preached without words. It said to the mother, "Your prayers are not in vain." It said to the husband, "The God your wife trusts is real." It said to the children, "The God of your mother hears even the smallest cry." And it said to generations to come, "Faithful is he who calls, who also will do it." When the mother exclaimed, "This is in answer to prayer," she was not exaggerating. She was placing her testimony like a stone in the riverbed, a memorial to remind her children and everyone around them that God was not far off but near, attentive, and deeply involved in the needs of his people. Think for a moment about the setting of that story. It wasn't written in a time of convenience like ours, where food can be ordered and delivered to your doorstep within hours. This was the early 1800s, a season of genuine scarcity. There were no supermarkets lined with options, no credit cards to lean on, no quick loans or online campaigns to provide emergency relief. If the family didn't get help, they were in danger of true hunger. Against such a backdrop, the arrival of a bag of flour was not a minor detail. It was the difference between fear and peace, despair and hope. Now imagine the ripple effect inside that household. The mother, strengthened in faith, continued to model before her children what it meant to trust in God completely. The husband, though not yet a believer, now carried with him a seed of conviction that no earthly reasoning could uproot. The children grew up with a memory that would become part of their spiritual foundation. When there was no bread, God sent flour. These imprints often become the testimonies that shape the next generation's faith. In our modern world, the forms of scarcity may differ, but the principle is the same. Some families are not short of food but of peace. Some households lack not flour but unity. Some homes do not struggle with hunger but with crushing financial debts, loneliness, or brokenness that seems impossible to mend. And just as in 1830, God remains the same provider. He may not always send a bag of flour, but He often sends the exact thing we most need, sometimes through a phone call from a friend, sometimes through an unexpected opportunity, sometimes through a stranger moved by compassion. What's striking is how ordinary the miracle looked. There was no bright light from heaven, no angelic trumpet announcing the gift. It was just a man with a sack of flour, following a simple thought that entered his mind. Yet, when placed against the backdrop of desperate prayer, that act became extraordinary. This is what makes God's answers so humbling. He often uses the everyday, the simple, the seemingly mundane to deliver what we most need. And here lies a lesson for us. God answers prayer, yes, but He also stirs His people to be part of those answers. The man with the flour could have brushed the thought aside. He could have reasoned, they probably don't need it, or, I'll just mind my business. But he listened, and his obedience became an answered prayer. How many times have we been in His shoes? How many times has God placed someone on our hearts, nudging us to act, not knowing that on the other side of that obedience was a family praying, Lord, help us. So, this story does not just teach us to pray in times of need. It also teaches us to listen when God prompts us to meet the need of someone else. The flour was not miraculous in itself, but the timing, the obedience, and the faith combined to reveal a God who is always working behind the scenes. And perhaps that's the beauty of it. God doesn't always remove scarcity from the world. He often allows it to remain so that His people can see Him afresh, not as a distant deity, but as a present Father who listens, who cares, and who provides, even if it's through something as ordinary as a bag of flour. What makes this story unforgettable is not just that a family's need was met, but that it reveals the very heartbeat of God toward His children. He could have allowed them to struggle on, to be swallowed up in despair, but instead He chose to show Himself faithful in such a practical, undeniable way. For the mother, it meant courage to keep going. For the children, it planted seeds of faith they would never forget. For the husband, it brought conviction that perhaps this God his wife prayed to was not only real, but closer than he imagined. It is easy, in our modern world of abundance, to dismiss such a story as quaint or outdated. But when scarcity enters our lives, whether in the form of financial lack, failing health, fractured relationships, or spiritual dryness, we discover that we are not so different from that family in 1830. We, too, find ourselves crying, Lord, if you don't come through, we won't make it. And it is in those moments that God still delights to show His power in the simplest, most unexpected ways. The beauty of this testimony is also its simplicity. There were no dramatic signs, no sudden reversal of fortune, no angel standing at the door with bread from heaven, just a neighbor with a bag of flour, an act so ordinary that it could easily be overlooked. Yet heaven itself was in that moment, because it was an answer to prayer. And that is the reminder to us. God doesn't need to use extraordinary means to prove His faithfulness. He often uses the ordinary so that our faith can recognize His hand in the everyday. The mother's words echo across the generations. God has answered our prayers and sent a bag of flour. That phrase belongs to all of us, every believer who has ever cried out in desperation and then received unexpected provision can say the same. God sends bags of flour in many forms: a timely job opportunity, a friend who shows up unasked, a doctor's wisdom that brings healing, a chance meeting that opens a new door. These are not coincidences. They are reminders of a Father who hears His children. And so, the challenge for us today is twofold. First, like the mother, we must dare to pray bold prayers even in the face of apparent hopelessness. Second, like the neighbor, we must be willing to respond when God nudges us to act, not knowing whose prayer we are about to answer. Sometimes we are the ones praying for a bag of flour. Other times, we are the ones carrying it. Either way, we get to be part of the story God is writing. When all is said and done, the legacy of that simple bag of flour is this: it shows us a God who is both powerful and personal, who provides not only for the body but also for the soul, who uses ordinary people to accomplish eternal purposes. And long after the flour was gone, the testimony remained, feeding the faith of countless others who would one day hear the story and whisper, in their own moments of need, the God who sent flour to them can send help to me too.